Scoile, 4-year-old new the Colossus in the Hull Scoile, agus an Oig so in a way score, no well not score, I'm going to year the stop of the Oakleague, a Castle Fold, a played the Searsha at here so, Cade Dean. I was a new Bahoira, on Soil Gribner, did a Vaughan Doyle soon, for the Court of Morocco, Cornelius Murphy, a man whose life, I think he was the first man executed in the new regulations at the time, which said that to carry arms was an offence to be executed for. He was court-martialed and executed, and he's buried here with others of his comrades. So is talk of Ian Rudd with an Christian staff the Comori Norshunta, and I know there's an Claude Ibra of all being, but Comora Yanaver got illa Ogra, a war boss the line Cogan is Yersha, it's the Dean the Sons, the Nina saw a whole being ish. Agus could the focal raw a few words on the life and the circumstances of Cornelius Murphy and the taking of his life. I want to have we can have Tomas McCormack who will outline some of the story for us. But before we get to that, to try to understand and recall to ourselves the reason why some of these volunteers had their lives taken. I want to invite Anton then Hull to read for us a document we're all not familiar enough with, shall we say, for over the Fumbukta, if you wouldn't mind.
Fumbukta Heron, the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which we received the royal position of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained for manhood, through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army. Having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies. Be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people's government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right, and again asserting it in arms, in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state. And we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to, and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irishman and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all of the children of the nation equally, and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government, which has divided a minority from the majority in the past, until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. The Provisional Government hereby constituted will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust to the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we evoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, Tomas McDonough, P.H. Pearce, Eamon Cant, James Connolly, and Joseph Duncan.
And this, we have a wreath laid on the plot in memory of Cornelius Murphy and all the volunteers really whose lives were taken in this course of struggle for freedom. I'm going to invite Shirley. We're standing in front of graves, so in respect, we'll have a short prayer, and following which we'll have a minute's silence. Margaret Shirley, Margaret Shirley, and they should record it like almost no made tune they should make. And they should record it like on oral on
Cardigan, we're here today to honour Cornelius Murphy, who was captain of the Ballydaly company of the Irish Republican Army. And I suppose we're a very historic spot because this is the place where many volunteers were held captive, where we had volunteers like Michael Fitzgerald and Murphy, who died on hunger strike. We had the escape of Donegal McNeilis, and then we had the executions of, beginning with Cornelius Murphy and the volunteers in Tripsy and the volunteers in Mourne Abbey and one or two in Tipperary and stuff like that. So one of the things that kind of came to my mind was Cornelius Murphy was the first person to be executed after the 1916 Rising, and he was executed only 2 days after the Tripsy ambush, and that those men would have been brought in here to the prison, and while they were being tortured, interrogated outside, they knew of the fate of one of their comrades, and they kind of knew that was going to be their own fate in what was happening to be 4 weeks' time. But Cornelius Murphy had joined the volunteers in 1915, and from the very beginning was appointed captain of his company and been very active in building the organisation. He mobilised during Easter week for the planned rising in the hope of bringing weapons from the Odd and Kerry and stuff like that. And shortly after the rising, he went on the run, but was arrested along with his brother Dennis, and they were transported to England, where they were held for several months before he's released again with the general amnesty. When he returned, he got immediately involved with both the Irish Volunteers and Sinn Féin. He was elected to the council, the Urban District Council inside Mill Street, and was involved in fundraising for building the volunteers, for building the independence movement, for supporting the first oil airing, and he's involved in the boycott English products in the hope of starving money kind of being channeled into English kind of funds and stuff like that in terms of revenue. And he had been very, very central to the whole organisation of the whole Mill Street Battalion. He was on the command staff, and he worked alongside men like Paddy McCarthy, who'd been killed in Mill Street in November 1920. In one incident, been arrested along with a fellow volunteer for gathering intelligence in Mill Street and had managed to escape. He was involved in attacks in the Rathmore Barracks, he was involved in attacks in the Mill Street Barracks, and just before we say his death, a number of the volunteers in the area have been put on a blacklist, and they've been marked out for assassination. So himself, and I think it was 9 other members of the Mill Street Battalion, and decided to form a flying column in the area. And I'll just read one quote, kind of summarise a little bit of that. Towards the end of 1920, 9 members in the Mill Street Battalion, whose name were on the murder list of the Tans, formed a flying squad of small flying column. The late Jeremiah Crowley was in charge of this body of men, and under his direction, training in military operations was carried out. The squad was reinforced considerably later on, and an effective column of close on 40 men was formed. On the night of the 3rd of January 1921, the squad was then consisted of 9 men, all told to arrive in Rathmore. The late Con Murphy, having arranged billets, went home to his father's house in Ballydaly, a quarter of a mile from the nearest house where the squad was in billets. At about 9 o'clock in the morning of 4th of January, the scouts protecting the squad reported the presence of a considerable force of military and Royal Irish Constabulary raiding in Ballydaly. The little squad immediately got into position of defence. Retreat was out of the question, as the only way out was occupied by the enemy. There was another line of escape if circumstances were favourable by crossing the River Blackwater, but in this day it was flooded. So the only alternative in case of the attack was the men to fight to the finish. With this end in view, positions were taken up in an old rock. That, however, was not the case on this day, as the scouts arrived a few hours later, saying that the RNC had taken Con Murphy, Dennis Murphy, his father, and 2 of his brothers, Kemp and Dennis, into their possession. So they'd been arrested then. They were first brought to Macroom Barracks, then they were brought to Ballydaly Barracks, where they'd been tortured for 3 days, and then they were put in trial. And Con Murphy had been caught with in possession of a weapon, I think 7 rounds of ammunition. So he was the first person to be tried under martial law in Ireland after 1916 rising, and the penalty was death. And just one other one quote would say, on the day of his execution, he was his brother was brought into the cell just a few hours beforehand, and the last few words for him from Con Murphy was, "There is no need to move anything. They, the authorities, have been told nothing. It is as well to die now as in any other time. Give my love to all." And that was in Dennis Murphy's prison diary. So, I mean, I think from his own perspective, he didn't concede any information to the enemy. He knew his life was going to be taken for him. And I suppose, looking what was happening on the outside in the war and stuff like that, and what happened with other volunteers like Paddy Clancy and Paddy McCarthy in his own area, I suppose he was kind of, in one sense, privileged and honoured that he was going to die in the kind of same tradition as other Irish patriots before him. And he did certainly live the legacy that we kind of are here to honour him. But we were also supposed to have 2 other commemorations today. One was for Michael John Kelleher in Knocknagree, who was a 17-year-old youth, who himself and 2 other youths were, he was shot dead and 2 other youths were injured while playing hurling in Knocknagree. There was 2 or 3 loads of black and tans came into the village, and they saw the young fellas playing hurling. It was just shortly after an ambush in Tureen the Gareth, and the tans just took the opportunity of extracting revenge and opened up fire on the young fellas, causing the death of 17-year-old Michael John Kelleher. And the other commemoration we had hoped to have was for Dennis Bennett in Moore Abbey, who had been killed when the Black and Tans went into Mallow Barracks, and they killed 4 innocent civilians, as well as 18-year-old Dennis Bennett. And just to kind of give you an idea as well on the few days surrounding the execution of Cornelius Murphy,
in the Bantry Battalion, they carried out an attack on 4 members of the RAC who had been drinking in a pub, and part of it again was after they carried out the attack, the auxiliaries, the K Company were involved with the Birmingham Cork and came from Dunmanway. Another group from Bantry came and they burnt a number of buildings in the town and opened up discriminately on people again there. In Fermoy, in the space of 1 week, the OC of the Fermoy Battalion was arrested. His replacement was arrested, and a week later, with the appointment of a new OC, they were again planning an attack, this time in Glenville. In West Cork, Tom Barry executed 2 spies. One, Thomas Bradfield, whose cousin, was only executed a week before for also spying. There was also the incident back in Burgatti House, which is kind of a very famous story, where they were giving an informer an opportunity to leave the country rather than face death. And again, a postman informed on the activities of the IRA. They had a running battle with the Black and Tans when they came upon the house and stuff like that. And there was a bravery of one section commander with 8 men held back the Black and Tans to kind of outflank them, while the remainder of the battalion escaped, carrying away one of their wounded comrades. In Keam in Glenville, the IRA also carried out an attack on a passing troop of British Army, and in Ballydaly, the IRA specifically targeted a number of RAC men who were involved in the brutal treatment of Irish Republicans. And we pointed out before, in the War of Independence, the IRA let go nearly 800 members of the Crown Forces, and they always gave the enemy the opportunity to surrender their arms and stuff like that, and they treated them fairly. And the IRA only ever went after assassinating RAC members who were involved in the brutal treatment or involved in the murder of Irish Republicans or Irish citizens. As well in West Cork, down near Timley, there were a volunteer, Patrick Crowley, was killed a short distance away. A number of IRA volunteers who were retreating, they were defended by 2 sisters, 2 O'Neill sisters, who placed themselves in front of a firing squad headed by Major Percival, and they prevented the volunteers from being executed. And it just shows you the bravery of the women of our country who kind of risked their lives. And we've always said they did as much work as any volunteers, and they did an awful lot of the tedious work. I mean, they stayed up all night and scouting and stuff like that, and providing provisions for the volunteers, equipping them in clothing and stuff like that. And I imagine that many of the nights and the days were weather like this morning here. I often remember back in the Fenian Rising in Calla, there was 3 men killed in it, but one particular Fenian had managed to escape from the incident when being followed by the RAC at the time, and had hidden in a tree, and it froze to death on that night. And I can imagine back in the 20s and stuff like that, that many of the volunteers faced horrendous conditions. I know one volunteer in West Cork who was prior to in 1918 while on the run come to pneumonia and stuff like that. So a few other the incidents again was in Fremont, another attack on the British Army patrols. In Youghal, there was the execution of another informer. In Burnford, there was another plan for an attack on the British Army, and there was several at the time in defense of it. There was several battalion meetings. So there was one in Mallow, there was one in Dunmanway, and there was another incident in Dunmanway as well. A very famous fellow, Paddy O'Brien of the Flying Column, 3rd West Cork Brigade, who was an officer in the 3rd West Cork Brigade. The British Army came, they burnt down his family home. They shot his father in the face. He became blind afterwards in one eye and stuff like that. And there was another incident on the same day. Another elderly man was killed in West Cork. And again, just on the 6th of February in Port McSherry, a farmer in his 70s, Daniel Maloney, was shot dead by the Percival's Essex Regiment. And at the time, 3 of his sons were in jail for volunteers activity, and one son was on the run. So I suppose we're here, I suppose, to remember history and remember the great courageous sacrifice that these men gave for Ireland, for our freedom, and gave for the defence of the democratic wishes of the Irish people, both expressed in the 1918-1919 elections for the independence of our country, and again in the 1920 elections. So I suppose we're just here to commemorate Cornelius Murphy and all the other volunteers buried here. So, Cormac Mahoney.
This concludes today's event, but can I just remind people that the commemoration group, the Independent National Commemoration Committee, is on Facebook as facebook.com Airless Air. That's it, Airless Air. And yeah, I think there's an event on again in Kilbritton next week, but information will be circulated to people. If you haven't registered your name, people perhaps could leave us with a mobile telephone number and you'll be informed then on. So I think to conclude, what we might attempt for our own selves is the singing of our own Nevian. And we'll do it ourselves. Shirley, you can lead us there. There you the sole member of the Flying Coleman reenactment group with us today. They've been with us for, we're heading on a year doing this now, so there's a few more years to go.